Hello and welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Below, your host. Very pleased to have joining me today, Mike Kennedy, Fire Chief for Ann Arbor. Welcome to Conversations.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, you're the Fire Chief and you've been on board in the city for how long now?
Just over 6 months.
6 months.
Yep.
And how did you end up in this area of whether it be public service, whether it be in public safety, or were you always growing up, always wanted to be a fireman?
Yeah, so I follow the path of always interested as
Yeah.
a kid, and was very fortunate. The community I grew up in Brighton had a cadet program for high school kids, and was able to become part of the fire service through cadet program in high school, and just got hooked and haven't turned back. So, it's been a
So,
wonderful.
and what kind of educational background you say do you need to have, or do you have, and to what extent is educational background sort of critical in the area of fire and safety and that?
Yeah, so myself went down here to U of M, have a undergrad in political science from the University of Michigan, and then also went on to get a master's of public administration from Eastern. So had a lot of experience here in Washtenaw County before coming to this department. For most fire chief positions and within the fire service, really within the last 20 years, there's been a revolution of that higher education. It's really shifted from a pretty traditional blue-collar role with usually just kind of a high school education to really the demands for more formal education and training with the administering of budgets, fire code, HR issues, legal issues. In Ann Arbor, we have
Political issues.
the political issues.
Yep.
We have a $16 million budget to manage with the fire department and have to make sure that we're managing that those assets and tax dollars appropriately. So
Now, you mentioned in high school working with a cadet program.
Yep.
In college, was there anything you say official or unofficial within the fire department area, or what's the entry level?
So the entry level, a good chunk of my experience was with paid on-call departments. When I was actually here as a undergrad at U of M, I was able to work for the Ann Arbor Township Fire Department. So I actually did that as kind of my part-time job while I was going to school here, and then ended up commuting my last 2 years for my undergrad. And then after that, worked for a variety of other fire departments, both career and on-call. Spent some time out in Maryland, actually teaching for the University of Maryland fire programs. And most recently come here from the city of South Lyon. I was their fire chief there for 7 years. And that was what I would call my part-time, full-time job.
Okay.
But my full-time job the last 7 years as well, before coming here, was working for the University of Michigan in emergency management.
Okay.
So been very familiar with the city of Ann Arbor, the town-gown relationships. Yeah. Very familiar with the different public safety agencies. So this has been a very wonderful, smooth transition for me.
You mentioned a couple times you say concepts of career and on-call.
Yep.
What is the difference, and what benefits are there to one or the other, let's say?
Both have their positives and their detractors. So Ann Arbor is a fully career department. Currently we're budgeted for 87 full-time employees. And so everyone, for our suppression staff, they work 24-hour shifts, and then they're off duty for 48 hours. Ourselves, the larger cities in the state of Michigan, Grand Rapids, Lansing, Detroit, Sterling Heights, Warren, all operate with career members on some sort of
some type of a full-time.
Exactly.
Right, and how many hours on and off may vary?
Correct. Yep, depending on the union contract. Yep.
And then you mentioned the on-call.
Yep.
That's not really volunteer.
No, so there's very few volunteer departments in Michigan, and even nationally there's very few. Most have transitioned to what's an on-call model where people are paid for calls. The department I was with in South Lyon, we were on call, where people were paid an hourly stipend for responding. That works if you have a small run volume. South Lyon, we had 600 calls a year. Ann Arbor last year, we did 7,200 calls a year. So
you're saying South Lyon, people would only call the fire department less than a dozen times a year?
600.
Oh, 600.
Yep,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we had 600, but so about 2 calls a day,
Right.
which is very manageable for a part-time department.
Okay.
When you get to the run volume of Ann Arbor with 7,200 calls a year, it's impossible for part-time staff to do that. And the other part too is with part-time staff, you tend to have very high turnover. So you tend to train people, and then
They're looking for a full-time.
they're looking for a full-time job. So there's no perfect system. There's positives and negatives with both. I've personally worked in both, and it's really what works for that community is what works. So
You mentioned for the last 7 years or so, you also worked with the University of Michigan, public safety?
yep, the Division of Public Safety and Security.
What role did you have with them?
So I worked in their unit of emergency management. So the city of Ann Arbor has an emergency management unit, which actually reports up through the fire department. And so I did that for the university. So a lot of planning and training for academic continuity, the emergency plan for the Michigan Stadium for football games, special events that they have. So, and a lot of that was working with our partners with the city of Ann Arbor at the time for police and fire. So it's been a great transition of now kind of on the other side of the people I used to work with. So
It sounds like when the position of fire chief for Ann Arbor then became available, it was I won't say simple, but a logical transition for you to look at that.
it worked out incredibly well. I hired in as an assistant chief actually back in December, and then the chief position opened up this spring. But yeah, this was always, this is truly a dream come true. The city of Ann Arbor and the Ann Arbor Fire Department is truly a destination for me. And I had hoped that this might come to fruition one day, and I was very, very blessed that it did. So
You mentioned it was sort of a dream come true. What is it about the city of Ann Arbor Fire Department that attracted you to look at it? And was this something as sort of a transition from a smaller to a larger commitment? And had you looked elsewhere, or were you sort of, I won't say, in a sense, happy with where you were at and this came available?
yeah, I was very, very fortunate that I had two jobs that I was very happy with. Ideally, I wanted to get to one, and being the chief of a career department was always a career goal. But yeah, I was very fortunate that I was in a good spot, so I could be selective of where I applied to. And when this opportunity came open, it was once in a lifetime opportunity that I certainly couldn't turn down. Ann Arbor, having grown up here, gone to school here, Brighton really didn't have much to offer as a kid, so Ann Arbor was always the place to come. And the Ann Arbor Fire Department has, next year will be our 130th anniversary. Just this outstanding tradition of excellence, of professionalism, and just really phenomenal to be able to be part of that team.
You mentioned that. Is that what attracted you to Ann Arbor as far as professionally? You mentioned the desire to be a career chief at a department that had a career, and it sounds like you really weren't going out significantly and looking for other positions, but this became available, so you stepped forward.
Correct. Yep. Absolutely.
What about Ann Arbor? Why, other than growing up here?
Well, growing up, I always wanted to work for a place that I'd want to live, and certainly, I mean, Ann Arbor always rates at the top of the list for most educated or nicest place to live, and just an outstanding town. All the different things that go on here. The art fair this last weekend. So and so it's a wonderful town with a great fire department.
And you mentioned the fire department, and over the years, there, depending on who you listen to and who you talk to, there have been some issues that have come up, dealing with everything from staffing to the how many different fire stations there should be or need to be, and the response time.
Yep.
What challenges, when you sort of came into the job, what challenges did you see immediately?
So still really working through a lot of that. One of the biggest challenges that we have are facilities. The last time Ann Arbor built a fire station was in the early 80s with the fire station by Briarwood, and that was actually built by the developer that put in Briarwood. So the city hasn't built a station for nearly 40 years. And so several of our stations are really at an end of life. They were built in the 50s or 60s and really have exceeded that. And so we really need, as a city, to determine that question of how many fire stations, where best to put them, and then a funding plan going forward for how to replace the ones that we have. So There's a lot of questions out there working with our city GIS department, finance and planning, really trying to put together a solid plan.
You mentioned not having built one since the early 80s with Briarwood, and yet since that time, but there's been one that was shut down.
Correct.
That was the Packard and Stadium,
Yep.
essentially one. And that was brought up at the time as having some concern, therefore, about things like response time and being able to address that area of the city. In your not quick, but in your 6 months here, are there areas of the city that seem to be lacking in sort of not response, but areas that could potentially be looked at as needing additional services?
We're working with our GIS department on that now. There's no...
When you say GIS?
Oh, I'm sorry, Geographic Information
Okay.
Systems. And so we have an outstanding group of very talented people within the city that we have a resource that very other few cities have that can work with us for mapping. So
Okay.
it takes the emotion out of it. We
Right.
we can put phantom stations. We can say, well, for 5 stations, where's the best one? Where's the
Right.
best spot to put them? Our calls are centered in the downtown core, just with,
Okay.
especially with when university is in session. And so we not only do you have response times, but you also want to place resources where they're going to be called to the most.
Okay.
So
And you have the capability of being able to sort of map every call. When you look at that, does that take into account the type of call?
Yes.
Was it a fire? Was it
Yep.
an emergency? Was it an accident? Yeah.
So we can look at historical data for the type of incident, the response times there. A big factor right now is the explosive growth that's going on the north side of the city. There's tremendous growth up on the Pontiac Trail and Nixon corridor, and how's that going to affect things long term? And for the most part, though, the city's built out, so it's really with some pockets.
Yeah.
There's
Limited growth.
There's limited growth. But a challenge, though, is in the downtown cores, we have this vertical growth now. So, and more people is going to translate to more calls for service. So,
Well, we're going to take a short break.
Okay.
Come back and look at your ideas, goals, looking to the future. Ask your viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
I'm a fire inspector with the Ann Arbor Fire Department. Today, we're going to count down the 5 most common fire hazards in the home. Number 5, unsafe storage. Always keep a 3-foot space around your water heater and furnace. And never store flammable or combustible materials like paint, aerosol cans, rags, or towels near a furnace, a water heater, or even your gas dryer. Number 4, careless use of candles. Never leave a burning candle unattended. Don't place lit candles in windows, and when you extinguish them, be sure the wick stops glowing. Number 3, overloaded outlets. Did you know that small appliances are still consuming energy even when turned off or not in use? Save money and gain peace of mind by unplugging them. Number 2, careless smoking. Use large, deep ashtrays. Make sure contents are cool prior to disposal, and never smoke in bed or when you're drowsy. And the number 1 fire hazard in the home, careless cooking. Always start with a clean cooking surface. Remove grease from stovetops and counters. Don't wear loose-fitting sleeves, and never leave food unattended while cooking. Always turn pot handles toward the side of the stovetop. If your pan does catch fire, cover it with a lid, turn the heat off, and call 911. I hope you found these tips helpful. Your safety is our business. And make sure your home address is visible from the street. If we can't find you, we can't help you.
Battalion 2 to dispatch. Fire's under control. Everyone's out safe.
Ann Arbor is home to more than 150 parks. That's 150 reasons to get out and get active around town. In addition to more traditional parks, Ann Arbor has some unique amenities, like the Universal Access Playground, Ann Arbor Skate Park, and 2 disc golf courses, all free of charge. With all of this and more, Ann Arbor is sure to have something fun for everyone. Come out and see for yourself. Visit a2gov.org/parks or call 734-794-6230 for more information.
Hello and welcome back to Conversations. I'm meeting today with Mike Kennedy, the fire chief for Ann Arbor, and got a sense of how you ended up here.
Yep.
And in your evaluation, and you're looking at what the 6 months has brought to you, where does Ann Arbor stand both within the state and nationally of meeting, you say, expectations or expected performance that? Are we doing well overall?
Well, at the end of the day, we have to look at fire loss and fire mortality, which is kind of a blunt way of assessing that. But overall, those 2 factors are incredibly low here in the city. The main driver of fire loss and fire death in any community is socioeconomics. With the very high tax base, the growth that's going on in Ann Arbor, we have new buildings, new alarm systems. These buildings are being built to save codes. We're very fortunate that overall it's an affluent community, and so that tends to drive down the fire problem. Now, what doesn't change though is we might not have the frequency of fires, but when those fires do occur, we still need that same response force. So that's kind of the balance, and I've heard quite a bit of, well, Ann Arbor doesn't have all these fires. Well, that's a good thing,
Right.
and we don't want all those fires, but the fires that we do have, we still need an effective force to respond to
And in
those.
certain ways, it's like insurance. You want to ensure that you are prepared
Correct.
to both fight the fires and, as much as possible, prevent loss of life and loss of property and reduce the damage as much as possible.
Exactly.
Now, how many members did you say that the fire department has as far as firefighters in staffing?
So our current budgeted full-time count for fiscal year 19, which we're in now, is 87 staff, and that includes our administrative staff,
Okay.
our fire inspectors. Each day now we're running 17 firefighters on duty,
Okay.
and that's spread out throughout the city, so we're staffing 5 stations. So,
5 stations, so you
Yep.
have 3 or 4 per station?
Yep.
Because you said they're pretty much on 24 and then off.
Correct. Yep. We have each of the outstations. We have a 3-person company that's either on a fire engine or ladder truck, and then out of the downtown station we have a ladder company along with the light rescue that does a lot of the EMS response with Huron Valley Ambulance.
And at what point is it determined that more than one response is necessary? In other words, someone calls and says, I have a fire in my kitchen.
Yep. So we have detailed response protocol. Huron Valley Ambulance does the dispatching for us. And so there's a lot of pre-scripted, if X incident happens, then we send Y response.
Okay.
And then we also have a battalion chief on duty 24/7. So they're really the operational supervisor. And for larger incidents, they'll respond, and they can always, any of our units can always upgrade an assignment, because a lot of the times what we get called for, what we get there can be wildly different.
Right.
So we have standards, but they can always adapt and overcome.
And with the standards, are there varying response time standards based on the type of call you get, on how quickly the expectation is that someone from the fire department will get there?
Yeah, there's some national standards that are out there. The problem, though, is there's no data set nationally of what communities are meeting them. So it's very difficult to say that X number of communities over 100,000 are meeting this. To me, it's really that we have to do what works for Ann Arbor, mean, certainly it's always good to benchmark, but it's what our taxpayers are willing to fund,
Right.
and what is considered by our elected officials the acceptable level of service.
Right. And have you been here long enough to know if, as you say, the politics of it all, the elected officials, are they, for the most part, I won't say happy, but satisfied with what they're hearing as far as response time, both from you and the department, but also from the people who are living in Ann Arbor, because they're the ones, if they're not happy, are going to contact their council members?
I think there's always room for improvement. One of the things that we're taking a very direct approach on is working on better data and metrics within the department, and making sure that we're doing accurate, reliable, and repeatable data. So not only can we improve ourselves, but also let our elected officials know, along with the taxpayers, of how we're performing. I've had phenomenal support from our council members, along with the mayor. Very appreciative of that. And but I think that there's opportunities for us to improve. One of the areas that we're working on are our turnout times, which is from when we receive the alarm till the apparatus actually gets on the road. Traffic congestion does play a part for us, that we can't just drive faster, as we have to drive safe and in a responsible fashion. So there's a lot of competing factors, but one of the best, in order for us to get there, we have to have those consistent metrics, and that's one thing that we are very diligently working to do. So.
And in looking at sort of the statistics, the historical data that can be gained, have you gotten a sense yet on are there been shifts both in the type of calls, in the number of calls? Is it something which seems to be fairly consistent, and it's a matter now of addressing the best way of approaching it, or are there things that are going on that you're not always quite sure about?
So as we kind of had mentioned before, with Ann Arbor being somewhat of a built-out community, our call volume has somewhat plateaued. We do have incremental response, and with the vertical expansion that we're experiencing in the downtown, those calls are going up somewhat incrementally. The north side of the city, the Plymouth Road corridor, had always been kind of one of the lower districts for us, but there's an explosive growth going on there right now, so the next 5-10 years, that's going to change. So where calls are within the city will certainly change. Nationally, fires are down, so that's obviously a positive thing. But also,
does that have to do most likely with the fire safety, and as you say, the codes and the new construction being, whether it be sprinkling devices, the fire alarms in apartments and in other buildings, all that helps?
Yep, numerous factors, from a social factor of people just having better fire education, from an engineering factor, the buildings are being built safer. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that kind of interweave to that. But nationally, not only in Ann Arbor are our fire incidents down, so that's certainly a positive. But now we're going on more of the automatic alarms, and medicals make up about 68% of our total call volume. So, and we run a what's considered basic life support to assist Huron Valley Ambulance with medical emergencies throughout the city. We have a phenomenal relationship with them. In addition to that, we do hazardous materials response along with technical rescue. We cover big chunks of I-94, so do a lot of vehicle rescue and vehicle extrication. So it's that multiple services beyond just that traditional fire. But
well, in looking, you mentioned the idea of fire education. Is your department involved in sort of preventive? In other words, going to, whether it be businesses or schools or homes even, to talk about what people can do to reduce the possibility of a fire occurring?
Absolutely. We spend a significant amount of time on community outreach. In fact, the last several weeks, including this week, we have staff that are involved with Safety Town. So there's a large fire safety component there. With Art Fair, we were there with the booth. So we really try to maximize opportunities within the community to spread messages about fire safety education, not only to young school children, but really all age brackets.
Without getting into specifics, if for a homeowner, what are the 2 or 3 things they can do, most likely more often than you desire to see, to help prevent fires from occurring?
Well, preventing fires, cooking in the city of Ann Arbor is our #1
Oh,
fire
okay.
incident or cause of fire.
Yeah.
So barely kind of careless cook type things. But the #1 fire safety thing people can do is working smoke detectors. They reduce your chance of fire death by over 50%. And we really recommend the 10-year smoke detectors now, so you don't deal with the 9-volt battery chirping at 2 in the morning.
Yep.
But for cooking fires, just to make sure that if you have something on the stove, that you monitor it, you don't go answer
Right.
the phone or get on Facebook or
Right.
something. So sit there, attend it. Really cooking, and then candles and smoking are kind of the top 3 that we really deal with, and that's pretty consistent not only in Ann Arbor but nationally.
And I would think, as working with the Detroit Edison, that, the whole issue of candles and the need for some type of lighting when there is a storm or when power goes out, of, once again, monitoring that type of necessity.
Exactly, and just making sure that, if you have candles, they're on a sturdy base, they're not near any combustibles. In the wintertime, it gets into space heaters. People
Okay.
sometimes overload electrical outlets, plug them into surge protectors, which they're not designed for. So, but a lot of that is that education of letting people know. But yeah, smoke detectors and then having a fire safety plan are huge to get out, stay out, give us a call. And a newer one is we're really encouraging children, especially, to sleep with their door closed.
Oh, okay.
So that prevents smoke from coming into their
Yeah.
bedroom. And that can really give some significant time for them to escape in a fire. So.
Well, in the last minute or two, in looking at the next 6 months, do you have specific goals that you've set out to try and accomplish in the next 3 to 6 months? And how are you going to be able to measure that?
Well, one of the keys is we're in contract negotiations with our union, so we'd really like to settle on a contract, and that helps everybody. And we'd really like to get that fire station kind of plan set up for long term. We're working on the budget for fiscal 20 and 21, and what do we want to do for stations? That's really kind of the elephant in the corner with our organization of long-term capital needs.
Now, with the issue of the number of stations, would that impact the number of employees potentially also?
Yeah,
Or just reorganizing how you disperse them?
all those factors are on the
Okay.
table. Yeah. It's what is really the appropriate number that we need for the city, and then how to staff them. Like our downtown station, our downtown station does double the calls of the outstations. So there we have 2 companies
Okay.
to help kind of break up that call volume. So,
Right.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's
been a
pleasure
pleasure.
officially to welcome you to Ann Arbor
Thank
now
you.
in your new position, even though it may be, you could say, old hat to you as far as the city, but it's always nice to have someone who's comfortable with what they're getting into and knowing what they're getting into.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. I want to thank our viewers for joining us today and look forward to your continued support here on Conversations. Thank you.